Hello everyone and welcome back. In today's video we're going to be discussing a couple of things, including some signings. My playoff prediction for who's going to win the Stanley Cup. Will it be Florida or will it be Vegas? Some injury updates. Some of those coaches and GM searches are over as a couple of hires have been made over the past couple of days. And we got a couple of trade rumors involving the Jets, Sharks, and Flames. And we'll get to all that coming up right now. Hello and welcome to another video here at the Internet Hockey Channel. Now in today's video we're going to be discussing a couple of things. So once again we'll start off with all the signings that have happened recently. We've got a couple here to talk about. So we'll start with the one that was an actual contract signing, and that is that the Tampa Bay Lightning have signed goaltender Matt Tompkins to a 2-year contract that will have an average annual value of $775,000, and the deal will begin at the start of next season. Now for Tompkins, he was a 2012 pick of the Chicago Blackhawks. Spent a couple years in their minor league, signed an entry-level contract, but he never really fit in after that, so he left the Chicago organization. He went to free agency, no one signed him, so he's been playing over in the SHL the last couple of years. He's been actually doing quite well, putting up a .908 save percentage and 2.46 goals against average in 33 games last year, and this year putting up a .911 save percentage and 2.76 goals against average in 32 games. So he's been doing pretty good, putting up over a .900 save percentage and under 3.00 goals against average. So he's done really well. But in my opinion, with the Bolts still having Vasilevsky and probably going on signing another cheap backup goaltender this offseason, Tompkins is most likely going to be the third or fourth stringer in Tampa. I don't expect him to get too much time in the NHL. Maybe if there's a couple of injuries, he's going to get maybe like a couple of games at the NHL level, but I wouldn't be too surprised if he was mostly an AHL player for the Tampa Bay Lightning. So a good signing, a good depth option for Tampa Bay Lightning, and he should be a good third, fourth stringer in the AHL, but for now I expect him to be more of an AHL player than an NHL goaltender. Next was a couple of entry-level contract signings. First with Boston, they have signed 2020 second-round pick Mason Lohrei to a 2-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $925,000, and the deal will begin at the start of this year. Now, Lohrei was one of the top unsigned prospects of the Boston Bruins. Him, along with guys like Potrias and Kuntar, were some of the higher-level Bruins prospects who were not signed. So good to see Lohrei get his entry-level contract. He had been playing in the NCAA over the past couple of years. Put 4 goals and 29 points in 31 games last year. Then put 4 goals and 32 points in 40 games this year. So been putting up around 30 points in the NCAA as a good defenseman. So doing really well. And I expect him to continue to do that in the AHL and NHL. I expect Lohrei to probably need another year or two in the development. He's probably still going to need a couple more years to grow his game, but it would not surprise me at all if in the next couple of years he was able to make the NHL roster. He's probably one of the Bruins' better defensive prospects, and he looks like he can be a really good, maybe third or second pair of left-shot defensemen. So a good sign for the Boston Bruins. I expect Lohrei in time to definitely be a solid NHL defenseman. And after a couple of years of development in the AHL, I don't think it will be too surprising if he made the NHL roster. So, good sign for the Bruins as they get one of their top prospects under contract for the next couple of seasons. Next, with the Seattle Kraken, they have signed one of their top-end players, as 2022 third-round pick Ty Nelson has signed his 3-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $868,000, and the deal will begin at the start of next year. So for Nelson, he was a guy who could have probably easily gone in the second round last year, but I think it was a very big steal for the Kraken early in the third round. He looks like a really good defenseman. Been playing over in the OHL over the past couple of seasons. Had 9 goals and 51 points in 66 games last year. This year, a lot better, 24 goals and 76 points in only 67 games. So Nelson looks like a really good defender. He's been playing over in the OHL, so now he's got his entry-level contract. I would expect him to maybe spend 1 more year in the OHL, or maybe 1 or 2 more years in the AHL. But after a couple more years of development, I think Nelson could be a solid third pair defenseman on that Kraken blue line. He looks like a solid, good player. He looks like he can be a really good powerhouse on the offensive side. So good to see the Kraken sign Nelson, as he's a really good defender. And I think he was a steal in the third round. So in my opinion, Nelson should be a really good third, maybe even second pair defender in the not too distant future. And maybe after 1 or 2 more years of development, he should definitely be a solid NHL defenseman. So good sign for the Kraken. Then with the Toronto Maple Leafs, they signed Vyacheslav Pesca, who was a 2021 6th-round pick, to a 3-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $852,000 and will begin at the start of next year. Now for Pesca, he was a really good goaltending prospect, been playing over in the KHL over the past couple of years, actually been playing for the KHL's minor league teams. A couple of years ago, he was able to get a .936 save percentage and 1.79 goals against average in 56 games. This past year, playing a level up in the Russia League, he was able to put up a .921 save percentage and 2.34 goals against average in 40 games. So Pesca looks like a really good prospect. Probably going to need a couple of years in the minors. I don't think he's anywhere close to being NHL ready yet. So probably going to need 1, 2, maybe even 3 years in the minors. But in time, I think Pesca could definitely at least challenge for like a backup role in Toronto. I'm not sure if he'll ever get it, but I do think in time he could definitely be challenging for a backup role. If anything, he could definitely be a third stringer who comes in when some of their goalies are injured. So I think that was a really good sign for the Leafs. Pesca looks like he could be a really good, possibly NHL level goaltender in a couple of years' time. So good sign for the Maple Leafs to sign one of their lower end draft selections of a couple of years ago. And then finally here with the New York Islanders, they signed 2022 6th-round pick Delan Kuflar to a 3-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $840,000, and the deal will begin at the start of next year. Now for Kuflar, he was a really good pick for the New York Islanders late in this past year's draft. He's been playing over in the WHL over the past couple of years. Had 38 goals and 59 points in 61 games last year. This year he had 31 goals and 61 points in 54 games. So Kuflar looks like a really good forward. I expect him to probably play another 1 or 2 more years in the AHL because he still needs some development. He was a 6th-round pick from this past year. So definitely, he's going to need some development, but I think that was a really good pick in the 6th round for the Islanders. Looks like a really good prospect, and I think in time he could definitely be an NHL player. So good signing for the Islanders to get him locked up and get another good young prospect locked up in their system for the next couple of years. So good sign for the Islanders to sign Kuflar, should be an NHL forward maybe in 2 to 3 years' time. Good for the Leafs to sign Pesca. He looks like he could be a good NHL goaltender in the next couple of years. Good to see the Kraken signed defenseman Nelson and the Bruins signed defenseman Lohrei. I just think both could be good third pair or maybe even second pair of defensemen in the next couple of years. And then good to see the Bolts sign Matt Tompkins, as I think Tompkins could definitely be a good third stringer for the Tampa Bay Lightning. But definitely, good signings all around, and I hope that all these guys, especially the guys in the entry-level contracts, who got their new deals, are able to continue and push forward to get regular NHL roles with their new teams. So, good signings all around, but that's all the signings we're going to get to today. Next, we're going over to the playoff prediction part of the video. So, there's no playoff updates. As I said before, the Knights 1-6, Panthers 1-4. We're now just waiting for a Stanley Cup final to start. It does start Saturday, and then we'll play again Monday. So by the time we have our next video on Tuesday, we'll have 2 games to talk about. So definitely interesting to see how the first 2 games go in Vegas. But definitely, we're just waiting right now for the Stanley Cup final to start. So not too much to talk about there, but I'm going to give you my predictions as to who I think will win the Stanley Cup final this year. Now, in my original predictions, when I was predicting before the playoffs started, I said that the Dallas Stars will play New York Rangers. So I was definitely quite wrong in that account. The Rangers lost in 7 in the first round to the Devils. The Stars lost in 6 in the West Final to the Golden Knights. So definitely, I was a lot closer with the West than I was with the East. But definitely, there's been a lot of predictions that I have been able to make right, but definitely not all of them. I expected the Bruins to end the Panthers in the first round. Panthers are now in the Cup final. I expected the Knights to be ended in the West final by the Stars, and the Knights are able to get to the Cup final. So definitely, I was wrong on both accounts. So definitely going to be interesting to see who wins the Stanley Cup final. But in my opinion, this is going to be a really close, tight, contested battle. Both teams have really good offenses. The Knights have a really deep team, so does Florida. I would definitely say the Knights have probably the better defense structure and the better defensive players. I think the Panthers have a really good defensive group. But I think the Golden Knights are a little bit more deeper and a little bit more skilled. Like, even Pietrangelo was on the Cup-winning St. Louis Blues in 2019, so he knows what it takes to win a Stanley Cup. And on top of that, goaltending-wise, I don't think at the beginning of the season anyone would have predicted Bobrovsky and Hill to be the 2 goalies in the Stanley Cup final, but they are. I think Bobrovsky is probably the better of the 2 goalies, and Bobrovsky's definitely been playing better in the playoffs, but I think Hill's still a really good goaltender as well. So in my opinion, it's really going to be a really close series, and quite honestly, I could see either team winning it in 6 or 7. I think it's just that close. But if I'm going to say who I'm going to think, and I'm going to say the Golden Knights in 7. Now, I know the Golden Knights are one of my top 5 teams, but this is an unbiased pick. I honestly do think that the Golden Knights will wind up winning this series just because they have a really good deep team. They have a solid group. I think Hill could be able to backstop them enough, and I think that defense is enough ahead of the Panthers that if they were able to get a lead, they should be able to lock it down. So I think the Panthers could easily win as well. I think the series could go either way, but in my opinion, I am going to say Golden Knights in 7, and that will be the first Stanley Cup in Golden Knights history. If everyone remembers back to their expansion draft just after that, before their inaugural season, their owner Bill Foley said he wanted to have a Stanley Cup within the first 6 years of the team's existence. This is the 6th year of the team's existence, so if the Golden Knights are able to win the Cup this year, his prediction of getting the Golden Knights a Stanley Cup in the first 6 years would be correct. So I think that would be quite cool to see actually happen, and I think the Golden Knights will be able to win. But like I said, I could see the Knights win this in 6 or 7. I could also see the Panthers win this in 6 or 7. I think it's a really small margin of error for either side, and I will not be shocked if the Panthers were able to come away with the victory. But whoever does come away with the win in this series, it will be the first time for them lifting the cup. They've both been to one Stanley Cup final. The Panthers in '96 against the Avalanche, they got swept. The Golden Knights in their inaugural season in 2018 against the Capitals, they lost in 5. So it's going to be quite interesting to see who's going to be able to win the Stanley Cup and bring the Stanley Cup back to their city for the first time in franchise history. So definitely interesting to see. But in my opinion, I think Knights in 7, but I think this series could go either way. So that's all the playoff predictions we're going to talk about here today. And then nextly, we go over here to the injury update part of the video. Not too many injuries to talk about. Both the Knights and Panthers are as healthy as they were when we talked about them last, but there's been a couple of injury updates with non-playoff teams right now. First with the Seattle Kraken, John Hayden, who has been out since March 21st with a lower body injury, has been cleared to play. So if the Kraken did make the Stanley Cup final, he would have been an option to play at some point in the series as well. But the Kraken are in the playoffs, so I think Hayden should be able to be back and ready for training camp now. He looks like he's pretty healthy now after missing a couple of months due to his injury, so good to see Hayden get back, but it's not really a big deal for the Seattle Kraken with them being eliminated from playoff contention. And on top of that, Minnesota Wild prospect Kyle Masters, who was playing in the Memorial Cup, suffered a lower body injury, and he's going to be out for the next 3 months. So that timeline puts him out till around the start of training camp, so not great news for the Wild, but I definitely expect Masters to probably return to juniors next year. I don't think it's too much of an injury concern for the Minnesota Wild at this point, and I expect Masters to probably just continue to play in the juniors. So not good news to see Masters go down, but he should be able to get back in time for next year's juniors. And good job to see Hayden recover from his injury, and he should be able to be ready for training camp with whichever team he signs with this offseason. But that's all the injury updates we're going to talk about for today. We do have a couple of coaching and GM updates. As I talked about in my last video, we could have some coaching and GM updates throughout this week, as it sounds like there's a lot of teams who are trying to get these situations over with so they can focus more on getting closer to the draft. So in Washington, they were able to sign Spencer Carberry, who has been with the Toronto Maple Leafs as their assistant coach. So Carberry was a guy who was highly sought after. Apparently, he had a lot of interviews. Teams like the Anaheim Ducks and the Calgary Flames seem to also have interest in bringing him in. But he ended up going with the Washington Capitals. Now, he does have some familiarity with the Capitals. He did coach their ECHL team and AHL team before taking the assistant coach job with Toronto. So definitely he does have some experience coaching with the Capitals. He was even named Coach of the Year with both the ECHL and AHL affiliate of the Capitals at different points in time. So he definitely has a lot of experience with Washington. So I don't think it's too much of a surprise that Carberry went with Washington. We do know that he signed a 4-year deal. So Carberry's going to be a coach for the Washington Capitals for the next couple of years. So I think that's a really good signing. I think Carberry could definitely help coach the Capitals back to the playoffs. I think he could definitely help be a really good coach. He's the first-time head coach at the NHL level now, so good to see him get an opportunity. And after a couple of years as the Maple Leafs assistant coach, he goes back to Washington where he coached their AHL and ECHL affiliates. So good to see Carberry get his head coaching opportunity at NHL level, and good to see it being with the Washington Capitals. Next, with the Nashville Predators. Now, there was a lot of speculation that the Predators may let go of John Hynes, and they did wind up firing him and one assistant coach. Now, Hynes did sign a 2-year contract extension last offseason, so he did have 1 year left on his contract. so they did fire him with that year left on his contract, and they allowed him to explore other options, so Hines could sign with another team at some point in the offseason as well. But definitely, they've decided to move on from him, with Predators now having a new GM in Barry Trotz. He wanted to have a new voice behind the bench, so they wound up firing Hines, and now they brought in Andrew Brunette. Now, Brunette is a former player of the NHL. He played over 1,000 games in the NHL. He even played with the Nashville Predators during their inaugural season in the 98-99 season. So he was definitely with the Nashville Predators when they originally started out, so he definitely played for a while, over 1,000 games. He also has some coaching experience as well. He was an assistant coach with the Minnesota Wild from 2014 to 2016. Spent a couple more years with the Minnesota Wild. Then from 2019 to 2021, he was with the Florida Panthers as assistant coach. Then a couple years ago in the 2021-2022 season, when Quenneville was relieved of duties and resigned, he took over as head coach of the Florida Panthers, led them to the President's Trophy a couple years ago, and allowed them to break their 26-year curse of not winning a playoff series, and helped them beat the Washington Capitals in the first round before getting swept by Tampa. So he definitely did really good. But then the Panthers moved on from him, brought in head coach Paul Maurice. He spent last year with the Devils as an assistant head coach. Then after the Devils said that Ruff, who was the Devils head coach last year, remains the head coach, there's a lot of speculation that Brunette may be a guy who could find a head coaching job elsewhere, and now he has. So I think really interesting. Brunette definitely has some assistant coaching experience, even head coaching with the Panthers as an intern a couple of years ago, leading them to the President's Trophy. So I think it's a really good signing for the Nashville Predators. I don't know exactly what the term is for Brunette, but definitely I think it's a really good signing for the Nashville Predators. Brunette should be a really good coach with the Preds. And given the fact he even played there as a player in their inaugural season, that's really cool as well. So good to see Brunette be the new coach of the Nashville Predators. Just another wrinkle this throws into the coaching situation. There was a lot of speculation that Pierre Laviolette, who was fired by the Capitals, would sign with the New York Rangers. But now that he's been let go and has been allowed to talk to other teams, there's a lot of speculation that John Hines could also be a favorite to land the New York Rangers coaching job. So it seems like the New York Rangers coaching job is down to John Hines or Pierre Laviolette, so it sounds like some sort of decision should be happening in New York soon, so definitely we'll have to stay tuned for that. And then on the GM position for the Toronto Maple Leafs, they signed GM Brad Treliving. And Treliving was the GM for the Calgary Flames for the past 9 seasons before he was not going to be brought back this offseason by the Flames. Treliving was a really good GM for the Calgary Flames. These past couple of seasons really helped build that team. And there was a lot of people saying, why did the Leafs go with Treliving? And I think it really has a lot to do with what the Flames went through last year. We know that Matthews and Nylander are entering the final year of their contracts. Marner and Tavares only have an extra year left before they need their new contracts. And look at what Calgary went through last year. Johnny Gaudreau left via free agency after not re-signing with the team, who was their superstar in Calgary. And then Matthew Tkachuk said he wouldn't resign with the team and that he wanted to be traded. And the Flames moved him to Florida for Huberdeau Weegar, a first-round pick and a good prospect. So due to experience, Treliving knows what to do with those star players. So I still think Matthews will be extended at some point. I'll be quite surprised if either Tavares or Marner will be traded. But like I said, I think Nylander is going to need a huge extension, and I'm not sure if the Leafs will be able to afford that. So if Nylander would be traded, I think they could definitely get a haul for him, and I think Treliving would be the GM to do it with. So definitely, I think whoever they keep, whoever they sign, I think Treliving was a really good addition for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and after moving on from Kyle Dubas, I think he's the right GM to take over for Toronto. So I think he is definitely going to help the Leafs, and hopefully he can help convince Matthews to stay long term. Maybe get Nylander locked up at a little bit of a more affordable price than what he probably could get at the open market, and maybe try and help rework that forward group so that they can make it past the second round next year. So definitely an interesting signings, but Carberry's now the new head coach in Washington. Hines is out in Nashville. Brunette's in. And the new GM in Toronto is going to be Brad Treliving. So some pretty good signings. And we still have some more to come as the New York Rangers, Columbus Blue Jackets, Ducks, and Flames all still need a head coach. Possibly Ottawa and Toronto. And then the Penguins, plus maybe Ottawa, could also use a GM. So definitely going to be interesting to see. But some of those chips have started to fall in the coach and GM search. And that's all the updates we want to get to today. And next we'll go over to the trade rumor part of the video. So just a couple of trade rumors here. First, could the San Jose Sharks deal Erik Karlsson? There's a lot of speculation out there that after not being dealt by the trade deadline, that Erik Karlsson could be dealt in the offseason. Now, it's not going to be easy. Karlsson makes an $11.5 million cap hit for I think the next 3 or 4 years. So it's not going to be an easy contract to move, even in the offseason. But I think there's some appetite to do it, and I think there could be a couple of teams to watch out for if Karlsson would be traded. Karlsson's a really good puck-moving defenseman. He was the first defenseman in, I think, over like 30 years to hit 100 points this past year, so he's a really good offensive player. If he can be a team's top-end defenseman, he could definitely thrive. I think the Sharks would have to retain at least some salary on a deal to make it worthwhile for the other team, whether it be $2 or $3, maybe even $4 million. I think they're going to have to retain some to get that contract off their books. But definitely, I think Karlsson trade is pretty likely to happen at some point in the offseason. What teams could we expect to possibly have interest? I have 3 main teams who are definitely keeping our eye on, and that is the Oilers, the Panthers, and the Blues. I know the Oilers were the team most people talked about when talking about an Erik Karlsson trade before the deadline. I know that since then they have acquired Mattias Ekholm, but I have also seen some reports out there that maybe they could try and add Carlson, even though they already got Ekholm. So I know it will definitely take a lot of pieces to do, and definitely take some cap gymnastics. But if they were able to get Karlsson, they could have Karlsson, Bouchard, Nurse, and Ekholm in the top 4, which would be extremely talented. I don't know how they would make it work cap-wise, but I think the Oilers still have some interest in bringing in Erik Karlsson, so it would not surprise me at all if they wanted to try and bring him in. Another team will be Florida. As I said in a recent video I did a couple weeks ago, Florida could look for another defenseman. They moved on from Mackenzie Weegar. They didn't bring back Ben Sherrod after last year. They have a bit of a weaker D-core, and I think they could definitely use an addition in the defensive group. Karlsson's a really good puck-moving defenseman. If they can move on from a big money contract, whether it be like a Reinhart or maybe even Bobrovsky, who's playing well in the playoffs, maybe they're able to bring in Karlsson. I think that's definitely a possibility. Karlsson looks like an elite-level defenseman this year, so I think he could definitely work really well with the Florida Panthers. The St. Louis Blues are looking for a retool in their blue line. I think they could definitely use a puck-moving defenseman who could definitely be on that top pair. I know they've had Parayko for the past couple of years, but I think they could definitely work well with Erik Karlsson. So it would not surprise me at all if the Blues had some interest. I know he's a little bit older than their core group that they're trying to build around, but I think he could be a solid number 1 defenseman that the Blues really do need. So I would not be surprised if those 3 teams would have a lot of interest. 2 dark horse teams I could see would be the Buffalo Sabres and the Seattle Kraken. They're dark horse teams and a little bit less unlikely because I just think they have a really good D-core already. But the Buffalo Sabres have a really young D-core, and if they could add another top 4 defenseman, I think that could really round out with guys like Dahlin, Samuelsson, and Power. Meanwhile, for the Kraken, they also have a pretty good defense, but it is a little bit lacking, so I would not be surprised if they tried to bulk up that defense this offseason. And the one thing that the Kraken and the Sabres do have is a bit of cap space, something that the Oilers and Panthers and Blues don't really have. So it would be easier for them to pull off a trade because it wouldn't be as much hard work to make the cap work. But definitely, I think Panthers, Blues, Oilers could all be likely options for Erik Karlsson if he was available this offseason. And maybe the Kraken and Sabres are less likely but possible options as well. So definitely, let me know in the comments. Will Erik Karlsson get traded? How much money do you think the Sharks would have to retain to make a trade work? Which team do you think would be the most likely fit for Karlsson? And what sort of a trade package do you think it would take to pry Karlsson out of San Jose? Next, over with the Calgary Flames, there's a lot of speculation that after having a couple of really brilliant AHL seasons and a really good showing in the final game of the season, that Flames goaltending prospect Dustin Wolf is ready to make the NHL roster, and he probably will be an NHL goaltender next year. So if that's true, they're going to need to make some room in the roster to have him be a consistent NHL goaltender. But they already have a couple of really good goaltenders in Markstrom and Vladar. So Markstrom has a no-movement clause and a pretty high cap hit, so I don't expect Markstrom to be going anywhere. So I think that does make Dan Vladar expendable. Now, Vladar is going to be entering the first year of a 2-year contract extension this year. So he's already got a couple years contract, and his cost control, I think his contract AAV is just over $2 million. So it'd be a really good deal for a team to acquire. Vladar is a really good goaltender who's been playing as the backup for the Calgary Flames, but sort of like could be a 1A goaltender on another team. So, I mean, teams like LA, Detroit, Buffalo, maybe even Carolina, Ottawa, maybe Edmonton if they can make it work. These are teams who I could see needing a starting goaltender or a 1A goaltender in their system, and I could see them go after Vladar. So I think Vladar is expendable right now with the Flames wanting Wolf in the NHL next year. You can easily make do with a Markstrom-Wolf tandem, and I don't think they want to sort of rotate guys like Markstrom, Vladar, and Wolf onto the roster and carry 3 goalies on the roster. So it would not surprise me at all if Vladar is expendable, and he is moved at some point in this offseason. And whether that be to a team like Detroit, or Ottawa, or Buffalo, or Edmonton, or LA, or Carolina, or wherever else the team needs a goaltender, I definitely think Vladar could be a very likely option. There's also a couple of other goalie options out there, like Hellebuyck, Gibson, Hart. So there's definitely going to be a lot of possible starting goaltenders on the move this year, and it would not surprise me at all if Vladar was one of them. So definitely keep your eye out for a Vladar trade. Let me know down in the comments if you think Vladar is a very likely candidate to be moved at some point in this offseason. And if he is to be moved, which team do you think makes the most sense? And what sort of a trade package do you think would make the most sense for a team to get Vladar? And lastly, here with the Winnipeg Jets, there's a lot of speculation right now, and all signs are really leaning towards the Winnipeg Jets moving at least the majority, if not all, of 4 of their really key guys this offseason. Now, we know that Connor Hellebuyck, their goaltender, Mark Scheifele, their top-line center, and Blake Wheeler, a solid veteran leader, top 6 forward, are all entering the final year of their contracts, with Pierre-Luc Dubois being a restricted free agent. Now, we all know Dubois really wants to go to Montreal. You know, he's been very vocal about that. So it sounds like he's most likely going to Montreal. The Jets do not want to lose him for nothing. He'll probably just accept his qualifying offer if he's still with the Jets this year and play out his final year with Winnipeg and then move on to Montreal. So I don't think that's what the Jets really want. So it would not surprise me at all if they tried to move him to Montreal and get him to sign there a year early. Then he just has to walk to free agency. So I think it's quite possible we see a Dubois to Montreal trade. It's quite possible you could also see Dubois trade elsewhere, but a lot of other teams wouldn't be giving up as strong trade packages knowing that they only be getting him for a year. So definitely interesting to see, but I think Dubois is a very likely trade option. And then you also have Scheifele, Wheeler, and Hellebuyck. Now, if any of those 3 guys don't have any indication that they want to sign extensions before the season starts, I think you have to consider moving each and every one of them. Wheeler's cap is quite high, but if they were to retain a little bit of the salary on Wheeler's contract and bump that cap hit down to like $4 or $5 million, I think there could be definitely a couple of teams interested in trying to acquire Wheeler. He's a good top 6 veteran who can definitely still put up points, so I would not be surprised if there was some interest in Wheeler. Scheifele is a top 6 center. You can either center the first or second line, so it would definitely be a really good option for a team looking for a top 2 center, maybe like a Colorado or a Boston. And then Hellebuyck's a really good starting goaltender. If he was available, teams like Buffalo, Detroit, Ottawa, Edmonton, LA, teams like I just mentioned for Vladar, would also have a lot of interest in Hellebuyck. So maybe the Jets just try and move all 4 of these guys if none of them are really willing to resign. And maybe they try and go through like a retool or rebuild. I think there's a very likely chance, maybe not a 100% chance, but a very likely chance that at least 3, if not all 4 of these guys are moved before next year starts for the Winnipeg Jets. So definitely interesting to see, but let me know down in the comments. Does Dubois get traded to Montreal, or does he go elsewhere? And which one of the Jets players do you think is most likely to sign an extension and remain with the Jets? Hellebuyck, Scheifele, or Wheeler? And is it possible that all 3 of these guys could be dealt at some point in the offseason? Definitely, let me know down in the comments. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video and subscribe. I also do a written blog talking about news, rumors, off-season posts, that sort of thing. So definitely check that out. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.